Hello everyone, welcome to Art with Tracy Anne. In my very first video on shading for beginners, I asked the question, what are your Zentangle challenges? And I did get a response for Virginie Berger, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, and she wanted to see a video on shading with coloured pencils. So that's what we'll be doing today. The pencils I'll be using in this video are Prismacolor. These are an artist quality pencil and have a wax binder. Of course, there are other great brands on the market. I just haven't personally tried other brands. Now, the difference between an artist quality pencil and a normal colouring in pencil is that the artist quality have a higher pigment content and they're softer. So this makes them easier to blend and the colour is much richer. In my video tips for shading, all of these same rules apply, so I'll provide a link to that video below. Think in terms of values, light and dark. So if we look at the example from that first video, I have areas that have lighter shadows and others that have darker shadows. So if we take a red pencil, we can create a darker red by adding a black, or we can use a contrasting colour like green. For less of a contrast in shadows, we can also use a range of the same colour. So here I'm using 3 shades of green. To blend these colours gradually, I'm using layers. Lightly colour with your pencil and just overlap slightly when you change colours. It's important that you keep your pencils nice and sharp. Now, if you hold the pencil back a little bit from the tip, you can colour with the pencil on its side a little bit, and that gives a much lighter touch. By adding layers, you're leaving parts of the paper. So if we look close up, we can still see the paper through that layer. The Zentangle tiles are a good surface to colour on. They're not too smooth, but they're also not so rough that you have too many bumps. It has that little bit of tooth that the pencil can cling to. If you want to have a nice smooth look on your colouring, here's a little tip. On your second layer, turn the tile and colour in the opposite direction. Because there was still paper showing through when I did my first layer, this layer, my pencils have something to hang on to. If I were to colour it really thickly and have no paper showing through, the surface would be quite slippery. I'll keep continuing to do this process, building up my layers. On the top layers, you'll find that you'll need to press a little bit harder with your pencil. Take your time doing this. You'll find that eventually, if you keep going, you'll end up burnishing the surface of your paper, which means it becomes quite shiny. There's no paper showing, so any pencils that you use after it's burnished won't be able to grip onto the surface. By building up the colours gradually, we have more control of the look we want to achieve. You can still achieve a burnished look by using a colourless blender. You don't necessarily have to use as many layers of coloured pencil. So this is the colourless blender, and you just colour as if you were with a normal pencil, and it will push the pigment into that paper. And once you do that, it kind of damages the surface, so that's the final thing you do. So now it's blending those colours even further and polishing the surface. you'll find as you work there'll be a build up of pencil and colour, and so it's handy to have a paintbrush so you can just clean up the surface, and it prevents you from smudging that colour back into your art. Now I'm showing you another process. We start off the same, building up the layers. This time I'm using yellows and oranges. And I don't need quite so many layers as I did before. I'm going to use a solvent. There's several kinds of solvent you can use. I just happen to only have some nail polish remover, and so I thought I'd use that. So once you've got your layers down, either using a paintbrush, just go over, and it blends the colours further. This paintbrush is a little bit small, so I might just put that aside and use a cotton tip. When you place the brush or the cotton tip into the solvent, just dab a little bit off. If you use too much, you'll find that you get a stain on your art, so use it sparingly. What this is doing, besides blending, it also takes a little bit of that wax off the surface, and this gives us the opportunity to come back in then and touch it up wherever we need to, so we can add some extra colour. Whereas if the surface was still burnished, the slippery nature of the surface of the paper wouldn't allow us to do what we can now that we've taken that shiny surface off. Here you can see I'm going in very hard, so I'm demonstrating the difference between using one layer, one thick hard layer, as opposed to building up the layers gradually. So when we use another pencil, it doesn't blend as easily on, that's broken, but I don't get that same nice smooth transition that I did with the other examples. Although it does overlap a little bit, you can see a distinct line between the colours. We can go over it again, and there's nothing for the pencils to grab onto, so they're just sliding over the surface. Now if we look at all three samples together, you can see the difference. If we use coloured pencils when we're tangling, the waxy nature makes it difficult to draw over with our pens. The pens become clogged. So if we use just splatches of colour, that helps, or you need to be very careful not to go over your original black lines. As you can see in this example, coloured pencils are ideal for using on gemstones. I'm not going to go into too much detail about gemstones for this video, but you can see I've created a light source, and that creates that reflected light at the bottom, and some spillage of colour occurs as that light reflects the colour onto our drawing. In my last lesson in Procreate, this was the example we used. It has similar shading to my original shading video. Today I'm going to recreate this using coloured pencils, but I'm not going to use ink. I've drawn a string very lightly. Now it's important that you do a very light string because coloured pencils do not cover graphite. I've picked out 3 coloured pencils, 3 different shades of blue, darker, a mid blue and a light blue. And I'll also be adding a little bit of white and black and my Colorless blender. I'm going to start drawing my pattern with the light blue pencil. So I'll just go around doing flux. If you watched my video on Procreate, you'll have seen how I did this. So I'll quickly speed through the drawing of this and get the outline down. So I'm filling the area between that center and the border with flux and adding a few orbs here and there. I'll start with my first layer of colouring with the lightest pencil. It's often good to start with your lighter colours and build up to the darker colours. So I'll just work on the tip of the flux. I'll go around and do that to each one. Then I'll start blending in the mid colour blue. So that'll go into the middle of the flux, just overlapping where I've coloured the lighter colour. I can go back in with that lighter blue and just blend it a little bit more with the mid blue. Then colour the bottom of the flux with the darker blue. Just as I showed you in the demonstration tiles, use layers to gradually blend these three colours together. And lighten it up a little bit also with the white. For the centre of this tile, I'm going to be working on the shadows first. So this time I've chosen an indigo blue, a dark blue and a black. So using my indigo blue, I'm going to go in around the edges and just start shading. Now that I've created some shadows in the background, I'll start working on my middle pattern, which is a bit of a variation of pepper. I'm not leaving an open center and just going around and creating those stripes with that little bit of a wedge at the bottom of them. Now I'll go back and work more into that background. Now I'm going to use my white pencil, and that blends it even further. You can often use a white pencil or a light coloured pencil to burnish if you haven't got a colourless blender. I'm happy with the amount of colour I've got on there now, so I'm going over it with my colourless blender, just leaving the stripes, burnishing as I go. Before I go into those lighter colours, I'll just clean off the colourless blender with a scrap bit of paper. Now I'll go back in and touch up that inside pattern with my indigo blue. I didn't burnish these stripes as I knew I wanted to go back in and sharpen them up. I think I'd like these lines to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to go over them again using my black pencil. That's fairly burnished now, so I could leave it at that. But I'm just going to try the solvent to see if it makes any difference. When the solvent's completely dry, you can go back in and add a few touch-ups around the edges. Even though I don't think the solvent made a great deal of difference in this instance, it did allow me to neaten it up a little bit. Now that's finished, I can add my initial. This is before applying the solvent and then after. I hope that video was helpful for you. If it was, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now. If you'd like to see more of my videos, click on the links on the screen and don't forget, hit the subscribe button.